Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today in this, our second Student Speaking Series of the year. The Student Speaking Series is part of our professional development program here at the new school, and it's a space for our MATESOL students and graduates to come together to share their research, their professional development, their experiences in the classroom, both here in the States and around the world, and also a place where teachers, we hope, can get practical, hands-on ideas to implement in their own classrooms. So thank you very much for joining us. We have one more Student Speaking Series in the month of December, and we will mail you information on it. And I'm going to give it over to Scott Thornberry, who's going to introduce the speakers tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel, and thank you very much for coming along in these inclement conditions. It's a particular pleasure for me this evening to introduce our two speakers because they've been in the program as long as I have, which is, I think, what, 5 years? Correct me if I'm wrong, in the MATESOL program here at the new school. And it's so gratifying to see, in a sense, the results of this relatively new program and to see how it's produced such talented and versatile professionals in the field. And so our first speaker tonight is Maria Brewster. Maria was on the first course that I taught. Wasn't that right, Maria? I mean, and we connected again subsequently at the TESOL convention here in New York, wasn't it? In fact, that's, I think, where we first met. And that's one of the other excitements about teaching on an online program, that you, it takes a while before often you actually connect face-to-face in real life, but it's always a great pleasure. And it adds a certain richness to what is already a very rich learning experience, both for the students and the instructors. So Maria is currently teaching at LaGuardia Community College and at Columbia University, and she just tells me she's about to take up a post in the Emirates in the fall, and I'm delighted because for her and also for me, because it's a part of the world which I regularly visit, so you might you might have a house guest. It's a great part of the world, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it and contribute a lot to your work there. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Maria, who's going to talk about her experience in Turkey, where she was while she was on her Fulbright Scholarship. So Maria, thank you very much, and let's welcome Maria.
Thank you all. Thank you, Scott, for that lovely introduction. And I would love for you to come and visit. However, we must keep in mind the morality laws there. So I guess you'll have to be like a distant uncle, should you come to visit, because they like to incarcerate you. Yes, and I promised my parents no international incarcerations. So we'll have to work that out. I'd like to thank Leslie. Where is Leslie at? Leslie and Caitlin and Gabriel for giving me this opportunity to present some of my research, and to Dean Celeste, who is not here yet, also for letting me present tonight. Essentially, I've just spent a wonderful year in Turkey at Selçuk University. And for those of you who don't know where Selçuk University is located, it's in Konya, Turkey, which is in the Anatolian region of Turkey. That's central, south, 3 hours from Ankara, 10 hours from Istanbul, just to give you kind of an idea where it is geographically. It's a very conservative city. As a matter of fact, it is the most conservative city in Turkey. So it was very interesting. Yes, most of the women there are covered. So it was a very interesting experience for me. However, it was the second Muslim country that I had lived in, so I was accustomed to some of the cultural mores, so to speak. So it wasn't too much of a transition for me once I started there. Now, I was based at Selçuk University, which is 80,000 plus students, located in a part of Konya known as Bosna. And basically, it's its own mini city. It's really, I think, self-sufficient. It has a hospital, a dental school, medical school, law school. It's quite a fine institution, and it has quite a well-respected reputation throughout all of Turkey. So let me show you some pictures. This is Yabancı Diller. This is the School of Foreign Languages. So this is where I went every day. And I traveled there on, oops, sorry. Going back too fast, there we go. On the tram. Now this is the tram that runs throughout the city. Don't ever be in a rush because it takes quite a while. And me being the New Yorker, you know, minute and a half per stop and you can time things out perfectly, you can't do that there. So the tram was always, you know, take a good book and relax. And these are some of the students rushing off to Yabancı Diller, looking very happy to go to class. Now, essentially, let me get to how I'm going to introduce everything to you today. Just a quick overview of the program, which is known as Öğretim, a little bit about the curriculum design, method, sampling, data analysis, some of my findings and discussion, and then a conclusion. Now, for the overview of the Öğretim program, what that is essentially is the Higher Education Commission of Turkey, also known as YÖRK, on March 26, 2010, issued what was called Article 7. And Article 7 essentially were guidelines that stipulated the administering of English language teaching at the university level. The group that they isolated for this English language teaching were the research assistants. They identified that group because that one was the most vulnerable as far as their English language skills were concerned. And anyone that's in the field of academia knows it's very important for you to do research. And right now, the research that's done in very good journals is all done in English. So they had to have a real command for the language in order to submit research. And as I worked through this particular research project and worked with some other academics, that was a major issue for them. Many of them felt a sort of kind of prejudice against them, that their research was never accepted in high numbers into some of these international journals. And for some of them, they were a bit naive. I think that they felt that their English was quite better than what it actually was. And this was an opportunity for them to really kind of get a real grip that no, it's not where it needs to be. However, with this program, with the help of this program, it will get you to where you need to be so that you can actively engage in research and you can do so in English and submit your findings. So that is essentially the major thrust of this particular program. And we were one of 50 universities that were chosen to administer the program. Now, the majority of the universities were the newer universities in Turkey. As I mentioned before, Selçuk is a large university, and it's a very old university. It was founded in the mid-70s, 1970s, so it's rather established. And some of it, as with all things, is kind of political. So they were chosen for some political reasons. And again, remember, Konya is a very conservative city. So some of that also played into it as well. So essentially, what we had to do at Selçuk University was to design a particular curriculum for the first cohort. And the university itself was under a tremendous amount of pressure to perform well. But they were very excited that they had a Fulbright to help them out. So that means they worked me to the bone. But it was all good because I learned a lot and I really enjoyed the students. So we were able to achieve a lot. So that is a little bit about the Öğretim program. Very briefly, I just want to go over some of the requirements or the objectives that were delineated to us by YÖRK. The program had to be implemented in all classes, okay? it had to basically be geared towards two things. That was to organize and improve the 4 language skills, but I always take out pronunciation as a 5th. So perhaps I'm a little old school, I don't know. The participants had to receive monthly examinations, which those scores were then turned over to YERC, and they also had to perform well on 2 nationally recognized examinations, one called the KPDS and the other one called the UDS examinations. And these are basically sort of like proficiency examinations, very similar to what they do with the British Council, very similar kind of examinations. So those were the 2 major things that YERC required. Now, the university, again, because this was the first time, they were not accustomed to really designing curriculum. So the first thing that we had to do was go at it. How were we going to put together something for these students? We were sent 50 research assistants. They were from different faculties. So some were economics, some were law students, some medicine, from all the various faculties. And we had to figure out how best to approach designing something that would keep them all engaged, considering the diversity of their backgrounds. So we decided upon the Pearson Longman series, The Language Leader, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but they responded to it very well. And we also put together an in-house course book, which was a mixture of different kinds of listening activities. I had brought several 60-minute pieces that I had put together myself, some NPR pieces, so we added all of that together. We also used a lot of writing prompts from the TOEFL examinations because we really wanted them to be able to write at a very sophisticated level. And then different kinds of reading text, because what they had become accustomed to reading was very technical material, and we wanted them to also kind of enjoy reading English, that it's not only legal briefs, etc., but you can also have an appreciation of nice novels, etc., different kinds of things, poetry, etc. So we put all of that together in our own designed curriculum. And we also had a nice lab because we got a big injection of money. So we had a multimedia lab for them, and I put together a listing of websites that they could go to, Randall's Cyber Cafe and many others like that, where they could go listen to lectures. There's a quiz afterwards, etc., that they could do on their own, because I wanted them to be self-directed. And in Turkey, it's a passive system. It's very teacher-directed, not student-centered, and I wanted to encourage them to take control of their own learning. Because to me, it's not only about learning English language, but also becoming better students, period. And I wanted them to understand that many of the things that I would teach them in the class were transferable to their other skills. And critical thinking was one. So I tried to really push them and nudge them with that as much as possible. So that's a little bit about the curriculum that we put together. Now, the method that we used for this particular study, the first thing that we did was we identified 2 things that we wanted to focus on. That was competence and performance. Competence and performance. Now, Chomsky defines competence as knowing the language, and performance involves doing something with the language. But for the purpose of the study, what we decided to do was to use basically our own definition, and that was that competence was the learner's ability to use the English language for its natural purposes, simply interaction, which was something that the students weren't accustomed to doing. They were just accustomed to taking examinations, but never speaking, doing very little listening, very little writing. So I think their strongest skill was reading, and that was it. But to sit down and have a conversation, a very natural conversation, was something that was very challenging. So that's why we decided on that definition for competence. Just for natural purposes, interaction. And performance, we decided to do a kind of a little take on it. Basically, it was from skill getting to skill using is how we wanted to define performance for purposes of this particular research. So that was essentially that. The two research questions were, how has competence in the English language been affected by the specifically designed YERC curriculum? Because we wanted some feedback on that. How were they affected and impacted by the curriculum that we designed? And the second question was, how has the requirements of successful performance on the KPDS and UDS examinations affected the research assistants' overall development of their English language skills? And quite often, the fact that you have these high-stake examinations really can impact your ability to really focus and really learn and enhance your 4 skills. So those were our 2 research questions. Now, the method that we used, I'm always one to touch base, and I guess it's my time at LaGuardia. We do a lot of student conferencing, so that was something that I was very accustomed to doing. And because my previous background is in psychology, I'm very comfortable with note-taking and writing notes about my students' narratives on different things. So I decided that we would do a touching base kind of meeting once a week on Mondays, which they hated. But they grew to love it because Hoja Maria, and Hoja's teacher Maria, asked us to come, so we shall come. And we would come once a week on Monday just to touch base, how is things going, etc. And during the 12th week, I decided to give out a survey to all of the students that attended that 12th week session. And basically the survey that they received was 14 questions. 7 questions dealt with competence, and 7 questions dealt with performance. It was a semi-structured survey. And we encouraged the students not to just write yes and no, but to also extend the narrative. And Turkish students can be very brief. Do you think that you're learning? Yes. Do you think that your learning could improve? Yes. But no explanation, no extended narrative. So I really, really encourage them to write as much as possible. Actually, one of the teachers that I worked with on this project wanted us to have the survey in Turkish, but I said absolutely not, because that would encourage them to respond in Turkish. And of course, this is an English language learning program, so that kind of defeats its purpose. But eventually, we were able to get some very nice responses from them. So again, I mentioned there were 50 students. However, after the first meeting, 2 of them dropped out. So we were left with 48 students. However, during that 12th week, 29 students attended. So we felt like we had a very nice sample considering it was 48 students in the program. That's not bad. And from that sample, we basically moved forward. Now, yes, okay. Now, the data analysis process was a bit tedious because, as I mentioned before, some of the narrative was kind of difficult to flesh out. There was some, I'm trying to remember the word that they used to discuss the mixture of English and Turkish together. We call it Chinglish when it's Chinese and English, Spanglish when it's Spanish and English, but I can't remember the term we use when it's Turkish and English, but there was a lot of that. So I had to rely on my colleagues to kind of decipher at times for me exactly what they were trying to say because it was meaningful, and this was the first time that many of them were challenged to really think about their learning. And so I tried to be as patient as possible and give them as much time to respond. And essentially what we decided to do was we took the survey, we took one-on-one interviews. Again, as I mentioned before, I would always write narratives on my students. So we took all of that and culled it together, and we went through it all. I transcribed a lot of the recordings that I had taken, and we identified different themes. And basically, from the different themes that came out of the surveys, everything that had to do with competence we coded it CPT, and everything that had to do with performance, we coded it PFM. And then we moved from there. And actually, we got a lot of very interesting information from these 29 participants. And 3 overarching themes came out of it. And I'm finally going to change this picture. Here we go. These were the 3 overarching themes. The first was academic language ability. The second, we decided to call the student dilemma. And the last was test sophistication. And again, this is all that came out of, we thought that other things, as researchers do, we thought that it was going to go in one direction, but actually these are the 3 overarching things that came out of everything that we received. And from there, we decided to kind of highlight some of the major themes that came up under each of these categories, which I'm going to share with you now. Under academic language ability, these were some of the things that the participants mentioned, some of the more, I think, interesting comments that came up under academic language ability. And again, this had to do with how they felt overall about the 4 language skills, their talents in listening, speaking, writing, and reading. And these are some of the comments that they said: I don't speak, I can't write, I can't speak English with other people here. I've neglected listening and writing. So they are aware of what is happening with their learning. They're aware that they need to do more in certain areas. They also said that I would like to improve the most writing and speaking because I want to speak I want to speak to people and write essays, which I thought was very interesting because this is going, again, towards their ability to perform research, write research, and ultimately, hopefully, present their research at different conferences. So I thought that was very interesting. I want to speak with world people. So this particular participant is really thinking about how they're going to function as a research assistant. I'm always reading texts. So they know that's not beneficial to them, just the reading of the text. And this goes back to our definition of competence, using the language for natural purposes, interaction. And reading the text is not going to help them interact much. So I thought that was interesting. The next was the student dilemma. And this had to do with our second research question, in that how are they affected by the fact that they have to receive a passing score on the 2 national exams, the KPDS and the UDS examination? How is that impacted? Yet at the same time, this is also a requirement by YERC that they have to also improve all 4 language skills. So some of the students, the participants said, I feel like I've forgotten how to speak. Okay, only reading, but I must do it. My university wants UDS or KPDS points. I focus on exams and not improving speaking and listening. So that is basically their dilemma. They realize and they really have a desire to improve, but their university wants the points. It's about that score. And passing score is 75% for them, which they must achieve on both examinations. So that's a real dilemma. And for some of the research assistants, they are the first in their families to attend college, university. So that's additional pressure when you are the first. And then to be chosen for this program is a tremendous honor. So you don't want to flunk out of the program, so to speak. So you have this dilemma, okay? The next category, and the last one, was test sophistication, which I think we can all relate to here in the States, where we have all of these various programs that help you prepare for the GRE, for the GMAT, the LSAT, the SAT, and some people are masterful with test taking. I mean, just incredible. And Turkish students were just off the chain with this. And what would really anger them about me was that they were always accustomed to the multiple choice questions with just 4. But you know what I did? Because I'm a Brewster. I gave them 5. So they would look at the test and say, teacher, it's A, B, C, D, E. And I'd say, yeah, A, B, C, D, E, isn't that something? So they really, so I gave them what they wanted. They asked me for a multiple choice, so they couldn't say, well, she didn't give us a multiple choice test. But hey, challenge builds character. So, so I gave them A, B, C, D, E. So these are some of the things. I solved last year's exam. There are telltale signs about the examination. So what I found very interesting about this participant is that they use the word solved. And typically, we don't solve exams, mathematical problems, equations, physics, etc. But to solve the exam. So where is any discussion about competence in that? We solve the exam. Telltale signs. So, you know, now you see how the E threw them off. I think the exams are not effective because of some telltale signs help students who do not know enough about the English language. So I'm able to score 85, and I met several professors that I worked with there who scored 85 and told me that proudly. However, we couldn't go to lunch together because we couldn't have a conversation without another teacher there to translate. So how is it that you scored 85, but we can't have just a normal conversation? Again, competence, using the language for its natural purposes, interaction. And unless it was a structured kind of dialogue, or I kept to a very kind of guided dialogue. Hello, how are you? Fine, thank you. How's your day? How's the weather? Anything outside of that, it was very, very difficult for us to have any kind of conversation. The next thing was we are competing with time, and sometimes we read some of the exam techniques because even if we don't understand what they ask us in the question, we can make it by reasoning. So they've reasoned the answer, but again, it doesn't mean that they really understand the grammar, that they really understand the meaning of the particular text that they have to read and then answer questions for. It's just reasoning. So that's the test sophistication. Now, I decided to include emotional impact because there were a lot of participants that talked about how stressful the entire situation was for them. And I felt that it should be included in my study as well because you have this even in the US and other parts of Europe. Students are just completely stressed out. Asia, the way the students are, I remember some of my Chinese students that completely were just nosebleeds, just headaches. It was awful. And my Turkish students, unfortunately, were in a similar situation. You were excited and stressed in the exam, so you can't be successful. And of course, if you can't relax, you can't do well. The exams make students angry during the preparation period, so you're frustrated with trying to prepare for it. I neglect speaking and listening. I'm stressed. So again, that goes back to their academic language ability. Also, it goes to that dilemma that I talked about earlier. A very bad effect because I'm stressed, and they're always stressed out. And understand that when I conducted this particular study, I did it before we got to the phase of the English language program where we actually started preparing them for the test, because what all of us didn't want to happen was to have it just become sort of like a test prep course. That's not what we wanted. We wanted them to actually work on developing their skills. So this was everything that the students were doing on their own. At home, they were studying and going through different examinations on their own. And that was what was stressing them out in addition to what they were learning in the classrooms. So I thought that was very interesting. Now, I interviewed some of the teachers as well. We had 4 teachers that participated in this particular program. And these particular professors that participated, many of them had studied overseas, either in the US or England or Australia. So they had a very strong command of the English language. And many of them graduated from the more prestigious universities in Turkey. For example, Ataturk, METTÜ. So they were very, very, very good instructors. And these were some of the excerpts from the interviews that I conducted with some of them. The assistants can do the test very well because in the Turkish system, we are all engaged with tests and answering in such a way. It is something that we already know. It's not something that is new. So they're very accustomed to test taking, but again, no mention of competence here. It has to be urgently more defined, and this teacher was talking in particular about the examination itself, the KPDS and the UDS. It doesn't put out an honest score. Because we have professors that have received quite high scores, but they can't talk and they don't understand. But they are good at answering multiple choice questions. And that is a real problem, because these are the same faculty that are expected to teach the students English. And they're basically, you know, they have, again, 85%, but they're struggling. They have to really follow the textbooks very, very closely. They don't make use of a lot of authentic material, and that's, I would say, a lot of them. Not all of them, because there are some who also try to use authentic material, but the majority of them keep within the parameters of the textbooks that they're issued, and very little of them stray from it. And it's because of their inadequate knowledge of the language, their strong command, and they're aware that they don't have the command that they need. Now, here are some pictures of my students. What we also did as a part of the curriculum was I required them to do presentations. And again, going back to my Monday meetings, I announced one Monday that they had to do group presentations. And for the presentations, I gave them the criteria. And essentially it was because we had gone through, let's see, we went through basically 2 of the language leader textbooks and all of the in-house textbook that we created. So they had to take a particular topic that we covered. They were required to recycle the vocabulary that was presented, as well as the grammatical structures that were presented. And I told them that this is a presentation, so they must dress professionally. And I remember one of the students commenting, "Is she crazy?" In Turkish. In Turkish. Now, I didn't know quite what the student was saying, but by the facial expression, I kind of figured it. So I just responded, "Tamam," meaning, yeah, but you got to do it. So these are some of the students. This is Group A. Now, please note that these pictures are before they actually did their presentations. So I thought that it was nice that some of them look kind of bubbly and excited about it. And as you can see in the center, yes, this is Group B. The young lady in the center is Abja, and I just loved her name because it means hunter. And she was very aggressive in class, so I thought she was well named. Let's see, this is Group C, Group F. This is, gosh, what's his name again? Uzel, I believe it is. And he is going to be the next Donald Trump. He announced that to me upon meeting me the first day. And I told him, knock yourself out, go for it, go for it. And this is Group K. And actually, the gentleman in the center, Mehmet, he spent, I'm trying to remember, as a teenager, about 7 years in Chicago. So he would always ask me things about Chicago. So he was very excited about the US. So these are some of the groups for the presentation phase that we did. Now, here are some views on the curriculum, because again, that was our research question. And this is some of the things that the students said, that yes, they liked the curriculum. They think that the teachers were very professional, patient, also because we spent 25 hours a week with them, and we were always available, or at least we tried to make ourselves as available as possible to work with them. I've been reading English articles, and this, when this particular participant says articles, they're talking about authentic material, because I used a lot of authentic material. Yes, because I can read better, I can understand English songs better, and I used a lot of songs. I like to use songs because you can broach more uncomfortable topics with songs, and again, remembering that Konya is extremely conservative, sometimes it's best to kind of approach it with music versus just coming straight out with it. So I was happy to kind of see that response there. Now, these were views from the teachers. And the second one I liked the most, that the entire process has been a language awareness process, because many of the students constantly comment about the fact that they didn't know a word or phrase could be used in a particular context, or that it's only used in spoken form, never written. So the whole language awareness part I thought was very important, that they were becoming more aware of how they learned, more aware of the language. And I think that's a very kind of important threshold when you're trying to develop and really build competence. So I was happy to hear that from the teachers, that the participants were coming and commenting in that way. And the first one, the students themselves personally come to them as well, and they realize their own improvement. So they're monitoring, and self-monitoring is very important. And they express that they are discovering how to learn by themselves. And again, that's something that I really push, is self-directedness in my learners. So I thought that was great. I think that the textbooks that we're using are appropriate, and they're being used for the right sort of materials, for the right sort of purpose. So I thought that was good as well. Okay. Now, I don't want to say thank you yet, because I want to tell you just a little bit about what we concluded from all of this. We also did an exit interview with the students, and quite honestly, they were real troopers, because by the end, they were tired of talking to me. But I was elated because it was all in English. So I tried not to ask them too many more questions, but what we included, and again, the program itself is a 6-month program, and at the end, if they successfully pass the UDS and the KPDS with a 75% or better, they have the opportunity to go overseas, either to England or to Australia, to continue their English language studies for another 3 months. So this is a tremendous opportunity for them. And many of them worked very, very hard. And after they did the presentations, because I did 2 cycles, the first time I decided to scaffold it. So the first time we did it as a group, the second time they were solo. And you could see the difference in their level of confidence from the group presentations then to their own individual presentations. So I thought that was wonderful. And our students did very, very well. Actually, the first round of testing that took place, the UDS and the KPDS, we had a 55% passing rate, which was quite good, considering that we had only been about, what was that, about 2.5 months into the program itself. So we were very happy about that. But our conclusions were, and I'm going to say this very quickly, was that, first, that we agreed that there was a real discovery process for the participants, and that benefited them because they were fully aware of their English language skills, the fact that their English language skills were not necessarily being sufficiently assessed. However, they still realized that it was still their responsibility to be active participants in their learning. And I thought that was very important, and that came out in so many different ways. So that was a real positive thing. The next thing was that, given the findings of our studies, we came to the conclusion that the exams that took into consideration all 4 skills, rather than disregarding listening, reading, listening, speaking, and writing, may contribute to the test takers' access to a better language proficiency. So we feel that the test needs to be recrafted. And of course, it'll take some time to develop a separate listening component, a separate speaking component like the TOEFL exam, etc. But this is something that ultimately we want to encourage YERC to do down the road. And we felt that this had real implications for the YERC program moving forward. And lastly, the exit interviews supported a lot of our findings as well, so we were very happy about that. In particular, one of the questions from the exit interview was which language, English language skills, had improved the least, okay? 23% of the participants said they're listening, 28% said they're speaking, and 48% said they're writing. However, 92% said that their reading improved the most. And of course, that's the skill that you need the most to be successful on the examination. So we realized that essentially, we kind of took 2 steps forward, but maybe 3 steps back, but the saving grace was that they were more aware of their learning. And I think moving forward, that will be a major kind of driving influence for them. And I think not only more aware about their English language learning, but then this is something that's transferable to their other skills as well, how they learn in their own particular areas that they're studying. So that's basically my research. Thank you all for listening. Questions? Are there any questions? Any questions? Yeah. Yes, sir.
It appears that they have a pretty good thing going in that if their competence in English is not that great, but they can pass this exam. How concerned was the university about you training them to a level where they may be able to exist outside of Turkey? They can go to England or the U.S. and get jobs there because they're so proficient. Currently, they're probably able to only survive in Turkey, but they can still provide, you know. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Actually, I think that the university was probably more concerned about those Turkish students that learn German and travel to Germany, because a larger number of them remain in Germany as opposed to going to the US or Australia or to England. Many of them go, they do their studies, and they return. There's a, I would say, a larger number of them that will do that versus going to Germany, because they have a lot of families already well established in Germany, and many of them just stay. And remember, Yabancı Diller not only teaches English as a foreign language, but within this school, they also teach French and German. And they teach Turkish as a foreign language as well, because I would take courses there in Turkish with the Erasmus students. So it's a full foreign language school. So I think they would probably be more concerned about German versus English. And there's also, I mean, this wasn't something that I studied. This is something that I want to do moving forward. I put together an abstract entitled The English Language, Globalization, and the Turkish Identity. And there are many Turkish that are resistant to learning English because of their Turkish identity. So I would say there's not a tremendous concern about English, but probably more German. Yes. Any other questions? Yes.
Overall, what was your experience with the Fulbright?
The Fulbright experience was quite nice. I was able to travel in March to the mid-year meeting in Berlin, to the Berlin seminar, which was nice, and I was able to meet Fulbrighters from all over in Germany, so that was nice. And then we also had a mid-year meeting in Ankara where I was able to reconvene with the other Turkish Fulbrighters. The overall program was not without its problems, because this was the first group that had been assigned to predominantly new universities, and because they were new, they still had their struggles. Some of them had very young English language departments, so there weren't a lot of courses for the ETAs to teach. That was not my experience at Seljuk, because it was a well established program. But overall, the Fulbright experience was quite good. I had the opportunity to meet people that I know that I would probably never meet in my life. Women from Iran, Afghani women, Palestinian women. This is just not something that I would think that would happen just by chance in New York. And for many of them, it was the very first time that they had met an African American as well. So it was quite an experience. Yes. Yes.
How was the school that you were working at? How receptive were they to the fact that you pointing out the flaws in their program and the areas in their program that need to be improved to really bring the level of the competency of the students' grasp of English up to a level that's kind of being falsified by the scores of these 2 exams that they're taking, which classify the students as competent in English when in fact they're not?
Well, being a language person, it's all in how you frame the discussion. So I wouldn't address it as flaws. Typically, I would use the language of some challenges, some areas for improvement, and we would talk about it. But they were very, very receptive to me. I had Gubin Hanım, who was the dean of the school, was very, very supportive and very open to improving the quality of instruction at the school. And as a matter of fact, I did 2 workshops, one in writing, and then I also did a workshop in assessment as well with them because they wanted to become better assessors as well. So I couldn't have asked for a better dean to work with than Gubin Hanım because she was very open. And she would just come in and merhabalar and ask me to do different things for her. So that was great. And also completing the program here, the MATESOL program, it gave me a chance to really put into practice all the things that I had learned. And it gave me a chance to see what I had actually learned. You know, sometimes you go through the whole process and you still second guess yourself and you wonder, do I really know this? But then there are times I was sitting in my office and working and saying, yeah, I know this. Yeah, I know this, yeah. So, you know, not trying to pat yourself on the back, but, you know, it's a good feeling because you've worked hard, you know, you spent hours, time away from family, etc. So it was a very good feeling, and I had a lot of support. The faculty were very comfortable with coming, knocking on my door, asking me questions about things. So it was good. It was very good. Yes?
Hi. I just kind of want to see how, I'm interested in the transferableness of this data.
Okay.
Working with, you know, youth right now that are kind of at a lesser learning curve where they haven't mastered test taking and they're still anxious when they take it. So these students appear to have at least mastered the art of test taking.
Yeah.
But, you know, how can I take some of this and impart that on, you know, inner city youth or youth that, you know, consistently under test?
Okay, hold on. I'm going to show you. Which one? Okay. Ismail, which is the student, I don't know if you can see him, he is on the right of the gentleman holding the paper. Ismail, this was I'm trying to remember, I think it was the 5th or the 6th time he had taken the examination. And he had a tremendous amount of motivation that all of us, the teachers, the administrator of the program, could not figure out where the motivation was coming from. And I haven't worked a lot with high-risk youth, but at LaGuardia Community College, I would say that I have worked with a population of women that are high risk for certain things. And what I found was being extremely encouraging all the time, trying to keep them as motivated as possible, and giving them stages, all things in stages, reasonable goals that they can attain, and preparing for them to be successful. Because sometimes I think about the differences in when I was coming through the school system versus some of the kids that come through the school systems now when I've substituted. And the only thing that I was able to come up with that there's a difference, because I really think about that, what is it with the test taking, what's going on with that, is that what I recall with my teachers was that they always prepared for me to be successful. And that's not to criticize teachers that are currently working, but there was a difference in the attitude, that there was an assumption that I was going to be successful, and then we were just moving right along, onward and upward, onward and upward. So I would say to be very, very encouraging all the time, to keep them motivated, and to give them reasonable goals. And even if they fall short, encourage them for that particular thing that they were able to do. And that's why I keep a lot of ongoing narrative of my students. So even if they don't pass the test, I can always look back to my narrative and say, but remember, when we first started on this journey, because it's a journey, you were only able to do A and B. But now you can do A, B, and C. So it'll take a little while before we get to D, but look at what you have accomplished. And sometimes as teachers, as educators, we have to remind our students of their successes and prepare them for what is going to come next. So most of my students will say, wait, Ms. Brewster, wait, I haven't done that yet. Wait, Ms. Brewster, because I'm already planning. I'm already planning for them. And that's the difference. And I try to be as encouraging as possible, because test taking, I was not the greatest test taker. I will be very honest with you. I was abysmal at it, just really. And I knew the material, but just sometimes I just could not do it. So I guess I have an appreciation for students who also struggle with it, but you have to keep at it. You have to keep at it. Any other questions? Yes. Well, I'd like to thank you all for listening and for coming out in the rain and listening to my presentation. And I'd like to thank everyone for their questions. Thank you very much.
One of the things that I find extremely interesting and gratifying when I do my 2 months here in the summer in New York is meeting the students on the program and how many of them are working in teaching new arrivals to the States, particularly people coming from, with a refugee background in particular, and often doing this on a voluntary basis. And of course, it's not a context that I'm that familiar with because I work in an EFL context in Spain, so we're teaching relatively well-off people who are learning English for whatever purposes, but certainly not with the kind of urgency and grittiness that's often involved in teaching refugees or new immigrants here in the States. One of the people who's been doing that is Connie Sargent, who's been working on the program here. Again, goes back, how far back, Connie? Were you in the first draft of students? Or the second wave, yes. So we go back some time, and Connie's been doing a lot of work with refugees, and she's going to report on that now. Just to fill you in, she's about to change her career trajectory in a different direction, and will be working at Fordham University. Is that right? From the end of this month, working in the business school, teaching business English. Connie, I last met Connie in Barcelona, in fact, where she was passing through. When was that? It was just prior to your graduation, in fact. You were home the day before. Exactly. So that was a nice squaring of the circle too, of meeting Connie, who I had met at one of the TESOL congresses. I think it was in Boston, wasn't it, for the first time face-to-face, but we go back some considerable time. So again, it's enormously gratifying for me to meet one of my students, now graduated, who's, as I say, moving along on her career trajectory, and to hear her report on the very good work that she was doing with refugees. So I'll hand it over to Connie. Give her a big hand.
All right, so for the last 4 years, I've had a great opportunity to teach at the International Rescue Committee here in New York City. And luckily tonight, actually, a great surprise, I have a few colleagues who came, so they'll be able to add to the discussion as we go along. But teaching refugees is an incredibly interesting experience. It's a very challenging experience. That's what I'd like to review with you tonight, are some of the challenges that I experienced and some of the things that I did to address the challenges. But I do want to stress in particular the rewards, because it's an amazing, amazing experience. Now, what am I doing here? Aha. All right, so first, let me start by giving you a background about who these people are. First of all, the United Nations and the United States State Department defines a refugee as someone who has fled his or her home country because of fear of persecution based on religion, race, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. If you've been reading the paper lately, there are an awful lot of news stories about Somalia and about people fleeing into Kenya, and they're the people who are grabbing the attention, the media attention right now. However, just in terms of numbers, there are currently 15.4 million refugees worldwide. That's an absolutely enormous number. In addition, there are 27.5 million more people who are displaced within their own countries. In other words, they had to flee their homes, but they are still located within their country. Of this, 80% of the refugees are sheltered in the poorest countries. So for example, we have Kenya playing host to Somalians, we have Chad, we have Pakistan that's playing host to Iraqis and Afghanistan, and many other countries that are really the least able to help these people. Now, these numbers are coming from the 2010 Global Trend Report that's put out by the United Nations. I really don't know how they get their numbers, but they have made the statement that in 2010, 805,000 people would like to be resettled into a new country. But in 2011, there are actually only 98,000 spots available around the world. Of this 98,000, the United States represents 80,000 of those spots. So you can see that in terms of a durable third country solution, the United States is the largest provider of that. Now, just in terms of living conditions, it's kind of, the people come in your classroom, it's sort of inconceivable to imagine who they are, where they came from. But in general, the living conditions are pretty bad. They're mostly coming out of refugee camps that are in host countries like Thailand, Nepal, African nations that I mentioned. And they have poor water, no water. I was amazed the number of people in my classes who have to actually walk and get their water. They have very rugged sanitation conditions and very poor health conditions. In addition, the housing is, it's almost inconceivable to me when you see the people sitting in your class, they seem not that far from me, living in Brooklyn, but actually they've been coming from, in some cases a 6x8 bamboo hut that has no electricity, no water, they're cooking over fires. And an interesting thing about them is they are unemployed in the refugee camp, but something that I didn't really understand is that they are also unemployable, so that they're living in host countries. They really do not have rights. They are not citizens. They are not legal guests per se. They are simply stateless people. who are living in these refugee situations. In terms of future possibilities, of course, what the United Nations wants to do, what the people want to do, what the host country wants is for everybody to just go back home. In fact, though, in 2010, less than 200,000 refugees were able to return to their home. And so the United Nations looks for other durable solutions. It's often the host country is what happens, where people end up languishing in refugee camps for years and years. And in fact, in many situations, refugee situations, people are there for now generations. So what this means is that children are being born and growing up in a host nation in a refugee camp, and yet they still see themselves as a citizen of a country that they have never seen before. In particular, we have a lot of students, a lot of people from Bhutan. And when you talk to the children, or even young adults who have grown up in these camps, they see themselves quite firmly as Bhutanese, but they've never been to their country. All right, now, I really love this chart. I really am very proud of this chart because it worked, but also it's a great reflection of what my classroom looks like. If you look at the orange section, this represents the Near East and South Asia. Okay, this would include countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Tibet, Bhutan, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. You can see this is a huge portion of what my class looks like. The next section would be this dark purple here, and that is East Asia. East Asia is Burma, North Korea, and China. And of this, predominantly within my class, it would be Burmese people. The next largest is the lighter purple. These are African nations, which include Somalia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Eritrea, Liberia, Guinea, Cote d'Ivoire, and Sierra Leone. Within my class, the majority of people, I would say, have been from Liberia and Guinea, though recently in the spring I noticed a lot of people from Cote d'Ivoire and Sierra Leone showing up. All right, this section down here, the green section, is not hugely represented in New York City. This would be Latin America and the Caribbean, which would include Colombia, Haiti, and Cuba. And then this section is really quite an interesting one, this blue section, the little one, the smallest one. This is Europe and Central Asia. Of course, when the International Rescue Committee was formed after World War II, this was probably the whole pie chart. Now it's quite narrow, and it represents people from former states of the Soviet Union, in particular LGBT. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people, which always adds to the mix in your classroom of refugees. All right. Now, just quickly, the process of how they get here. There are all these really big governmental organizations like the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the U.S. State Department, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. These people are out there in the world doing their thing. They're getting the refugees into the camps. They're figuring out whatever they're figuring out there. What's important is this other part of the chart, which is that there are 10 NGOs within the United States that work to resettle people, one of which is the International Rescue Committee, which is where I work. All right, now, there are several challenges, and I want to tell you about 4 different challenges. The first one is pretty obvious. You will have incredible diversity within the class. And I don't mean just national diversity, which in and of itself is a very interesting thing, but there are so many dimensions of diversity going on with the classroom, I can't even tell you. First of all, just in terms of nationality, you will encounter some very interesting situations. Here is one example. I had a lovely woman in my class. She was a member of Falun Gong, which is, some people might say, a cult in China, treated very badly by the Chinese government. And she was this incredibly lovely woman. Well, one day, a new group of refugees came in, and they were a family from Tibet. Now, this family had traveled for 19 days on foot across the Himalayas to escape with their children on their back. All right, it was an incredibly intense ordeal, and I think fairly typical for Tibetans. They escape into India, and there they register with the United Nations. She was so excited because she said, "Oh, fantastic, look, there's some Chinese people here now. We are all Chinese. We are from the same country." And the Tibetans, who had just escaped Tibet, were like, "No, we are not from the same country." So nationality can play out in very interesting ways. All of these dimensions have, these occur in every ESL class, but in a class of refugees, they take on a particular overtone of politics. Certainly you will have differences of religion, you will definitely have Muslim, you will have some extreme Christianity, Hindu, Buddhism, and always lurking in the side, because this is New York City, Judaism, only because it's part of cultural orientation. So all of this is in a mix in the classroom. Marital status, all right, well, this seems fairly obvious. You'll have a husband and a wife, you'll have some people who are married, some people who aren't married, but when you throw in LGBT, suddenly you have two women sitting together. This is not a big deal if you're from New York. If you are from a Muslim, very strict country, this is, if you're from Iran, you've been told your whole life that it doesn't even exist in your country. So this is something very different. Another thing that has been interesting is you also will have people who are part of polygamous marriages. So I had one situation where there was a first wife from Afghanistan. She had divorced her husband, and he had abused her, and had taken on a second wife who was younger. At the same time, I had a woman in the same class who was from Cameroon. She was a third wife, and she was the one who was younger and was being lavished with money and attention. We did a unit, unbeknownst to me that this was happening in my class, we did a unit on weddings, which seemed like a completely non-controversial topic. And then while we were talking about it, the third wife from Cameroon attacked the first wife from Afghanistan and said, well, the reason your marriage didn't work out was because you didn't know how to love your husband properly. And, you didn't treat him right, and, you just didn't do it right. And she burst into tears and had to leave the room, and it was drama, and the rest of the class is sitting there like, oh my God. So this can crop up in different ways than in a normal ESL class. Of course, you have gender, you have age, you have socioeconomics, you have people from Iraq who are middle class or maybe even upper middle class people. They're coming from very nice, 5-bedroom homes in the middle of Baghdad, and in the same class you can have somebody who was quite literally a rice farmer in Burma. They're sitting in the same classroom with you. Education level, of course, is multidimensional, and trauma level also. Some people have been protected, some people have been on the front lines of really horrible things. All of this going on in your classroom. All right, a second challenge in this particular classroom is it's an open classroom. And what I mean by this is, again, multi-dimensions on openness here. But they all lead to the same thing, which is an incredible amount of unpredictability. It's very difficult to plan a lesson. It's very difficult to know who's going to show up that day, who's going to be there, or what is going to happen. I was absolutely terrified every class of my practicum, which was being filmed, because I never knew what was going to happen. But you will have in the class a revolving door of people. So there are people who are coming in who are newly processed, and then at the same time, the United States policy is that they will support refugees for a certain amount of time, after which they have to become self-sufficient. This means they must get a job immediately. And so you have people coming in and people going out into a new job. At the same time, while they're in and in your class, they will have conflicting appointments and meetings. They'll be meeting with their lawyer about immigration. They'll be meeting for health checkups. They'll be meeting for job interviews. Also, something that my practicum professor pointed out to me is that there are cultural differences about time. So when I say class starts at 10, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody understands that they need to be there actually at 10. And so people might wander in at 10:15, and then there might be a bit more. By about 10:45, I have my full class. There are different, people are dealing with emotional issues differently, so that some people are coming to class for the express purpose of being with other people and meeting other people. Other people are dealing with their emotional issues in a different way, where they can't leave their apartment and it's hard for them to motivate. So this can lead to an unpredictability about attendance. And finally, young children in the classroom. There are, I know the IRC is trying to be a little more disciplined about this, but nonetheless, I can't tell you the number of times that I've held people's babies, that we've entertained small children with crayons and projects and so on, because people are in a bind, they bring their children, and children in the class lead to a lot of unpredictability. All right, I had some ideas from my experience about how to minimize it. First of all, the biggest thing, stop complaining about it and just embrace the chaos, because that's the way it's going to be. One thing that we did at the IRC, we started adopting a 3 to 6 month curriculum that allows entry at any point, and at the same time create standalone lessons so that anybody can come at any class and get something out of it. I personally, in my style, I start the class on time, I end the class on time, and we just keep moving forward no matter what the chaos is. And I try in every class to encourage a feeling of community so that people will want to come for many other reasons other than just learning English. And my own personal style is I don't penalize people who have child care issues. I say, bring them in and we'll make it work. All right, now, the third challenge is that within these classes there is a huge disparity of levels. So even though I taught beginning English, there were all kinds of people in my class, and then the next year when I taught intermediate English, it was all the same people anyway. So you can call it what you want, but you're going to get a mixed level of people. So I wanted to show you, this is a little film clip that I put together. This was one single class, and it was actually a beginner level class that you're going to see here. And it had a very structured task, which is we were talking about the 5 senses and learning the English words that you needed to know to describe 5 senses. And I handed out colored pencils, and people had to draw pictures about the 5 senses. And then they had to explain what was in their pictures. And you're going to see 3 very distinct levels here. So let's have a look.
The second one, I have the 4th picture. And the picture which I have drawn here is not really trustworthy. I have a sketch only. Okay. And this picture is a baby. It's a baby. And baby looks pretty. His eyes are all human beings. Yes. In the same way, last picture number 5, something that feels good. See, I have drawn a picture. of pictures.
Very good. All right, yes.
Something that smells nice. Flower.
A flower. Okay, everybody loves that. Yeah.
Something that looks pretty. I choose the balls.
Something that looks pretty.
Balls.
Balls.
Yes.
Why?
Sometimes you can see the ball.
Yeah.
You know the ball.
Like a veggie.
Ball.
A ball.
Ball. Yeah. To play.
A ball.
The ball. Yes.
And the ball is pretty. You mean because it's colored or?
Yes.
So what did you draw there? Is that like a soccer ball? Like a football?
Yes.
Soccer ball. Okay, very good.
Something that feels good. A shadow.
A sweater. Yeah. The first picture you have is? What is that called? Do you remember?
The apple.
It's called an apple, right? So, an apple is something that tastes good. Okay, and it's delicious, right? Delicious. All right, what's the next picture? What is this?
That is a radio.
A radio. Okay, and a radio,
I listen.
you listen to a radio.
Music.
Right. You listen to music on the radio, okay? And number 3? What is number 3? Okay. So you can see this is in the same class doing the same task. So the gentleman, it was just sort of on a roll. I mean, he was just going. I actually aimed the class at the second young woman who was sort of at a high beginner. And then this woman here was somebody who required a great deal of scaffolding and yet could feel part of that class. All right. Now, a second dimension of mixed level is the issue of literacy. Now, I came to the new school, worked on my master's to learn how to teach English as a second language. I knew nothing about teaching reading. But when I got to the IRC, I discovered suddenly I was teaching an extra course after my class in reading. And there are several different problems that come up in teaching reading. One is you will have people who cannot read in their own language and they don't know English. You will have people who cannot read in their own language, but they do know English. And then finally, you will have people who can read in their own language, but they don't know the alphabet in English. So in the first case, you have a group of people who do not understand how to decode. This is a big problem, and you can't reach them because they don't speak English. Okay, so there are two different problems going on. In the second scenario, they don't know how to decode, but they speak English well enough that they should be in maybe an intermediate class. If you put them back in a beginner class, it's boring for them. And finally, the third problem. All right. So here are some overall ideas that I've tried with mixed level classes. First of all, again, I try to create this cooperative environment. At times, I will lean on some of the upper level students to help the lower level students. I'll pair them together or put them in small groups. I don't go to this all the time. It can burn people out, but it can work at times. This is something I learned in my practicum from my professor who said, Connie, don't worry about it. Start thinking about your classroom as a one-room schoolhouse. Get one group to be working on one thing and then get another group to be working on something else, and you work with one group at a time. And the other thing is provide highly structured activities that can be expanded and made more open-ended for upper levels. You could see that in that film strip where that guy could really go with it and really work on his English, whereas the other woman who required so much scaffolding, which I learned from Scott Thornbury in a video, and then I went and tried it, I think actually she felt like she was a part of the class. I think she felt like she was speaking English as much as the man who was on a roll. And some specific ideas are for speaking using scaffolding. At lower levels, I've allowed time for students to make notes and use their notes to speak. And at other times, you saw in the video as well, where I press on students who can handle it to kind of go a little further and to justify what their opinion is, or to state something a little bit deeper. For listening, I use a lot of authentic video and audio, but I always provide written transcripts. It's incredibly time-consuming, but it's worth it. I pre-teach vocabulary so that even people who are at a beginning level can at least listen for some words. And something that I tried in the spring, I'd actually seen it in Jeremy Harmer's methods class, was I told a story. It was a creation myth. It was before we went to the American Indian Museum. I told a creation myth. I told it 3 times to the class. And then I divided the class into 2 groups, mixed level groups. So there were people who were very proficient at writing and understanding, and there were people all the way down who couldn't read or write at all, but actually could listen well. And I had them recreate the story. We did it on big sheets of paper, which I then put on the board, and we compared the 2 groups. It became amazingly competitive, and it was very successful. For reading, I use authentic materials like newspaper and magazine articles for the upper levels, and I adapt versions for the lower levels. I use longer passages so that upper levels will use a longer passage and the lower level will maybe read only one part of it. I often ask for volunteers to read so that other people in the class can just follow along. And when there are illiterate people in my class, I have them sit up the front very close to me so that as volunteers are reading, I'm literally using my finger to show them the words as we read along. For writing, at the lower levels, sometimes I'll give them an exact copy of what I want them to write. And for illiterate people, I may even just give them 1 or 2 words, and they literally, it will take them an excruciating amount of time to write the word. And then I often do this where at the upper levels, I'll ask them to write on the board, and then as a whole class, we can look at what they've written and correct it together. All right, now the final challenge, and it doesn't seem like this would be such a challenge, but it turned into a big challenge for me, is what to teach, okay? Now, obviously, we're teaching a survival curriculum and cultural orientation. And a survival curriculum seemed to be, to me, to be sort of non-controversial. It's like personal identification that includes, understanding family relationships, filling out forms, things like that, food and money, health, transportation, clothing, housing, and employment. However, my last semester at the new school, I took a very provocative course on English for specific purposes. And in this course, I did some reading about the survival curriculum. And I read this woman named Elsa Auerbach, who, in my reading, introduced me to the idea of critical pedagogy. This was a mind-blowing experience for me, because Elsa Auerbach claims that, in fact, the survival curriculum is perpetuating the United States policy of forcing these people into low-wage jobs, minimum wage jobs, where they can never escape. And that in a survival curriculum, with survival texts that are out there, we are actually giving them the language of poverty. We're not giving them the tools that will allow them to raise themselves up and get out of here. When I read this, I thought, oh my gosh, here I thought I was doing such a good thing volunteering here. Elsa Auerbach went on to say that a lot of the survival curriculum and survival texts presents an idealized presentation of reality with a patronizing attitude. It has a very one-sided approach to culture, which, you know, you would think cultural orientation, yes, we're teaching about America, but in fact, it is really, it's one-sided. It's not taking into consideration where these people are coming from and who they are. In addition, it provides a model of language acquisition that is superficially communicative. By that I mean, when I really looked at things, it was full of a lot of dialogues that were completely display. The questions and the answers were totally display. There was nothing actually substantive happening between me and my students. And she called this assistentialism, I think that's how you pronounce that, where teachers are finding solutions and prescribing to their students what to do. And she talks about this guy, Pablo Freire, who I believe is cited as the father of critical pedagogy. He was working in Brazil with very poverty-stricken learners. And she said about this type of teaching and about sort of paraphrasing Pablo Freire, she said, the greatest danger of this approach is that it reinforces the silence and passivity of powerless people rather than creating conditions which allow them to identify and think critically about problems. All right, I read this. I looked at my own lesson plans, and I realized there was a lot there that was maybe true. Okay, in my own lesson plans, I was teaching food units that prescribed what to eat using the United States government food pyramid. I was teaching health units that focus on making doctor's appointments, speaking to the receptionist, describing symptoms, talking to the doctor, and prescriptions. This is an incredibly well-intentioned lesson plan. It's a good lesson plan, but not necessarily the way it was being presented. In other words, refugees are actually not going to call up a doctor. They are not going to have a private doctor. They're not going to call up and make an appointment. They're going to be at work, probably. It's going to be very hard for them to make an appointment. And furthermore, giving them the language of, oh, I have a backache, oh, I have a stomach ache, oh, I have a headache, is not actually reality and not actually going to help them. This became clear to me when one of my students, a 16-year-old boy, had to take his mother to the hospital, ended up at the emergency room. She ended up in the hospital for several days, and it fell on him to do all of the navigating through that system, but I hadn't actually given him any of the tools to do it. All right, it goes on into housing units that were not really very realistic and employment units that only went so far. So I'm saying this to my colleagues at the IRC, but the employment units that we teach focus on applications and on what to wear and writing a resume and interviewing, and that's all important, but it doesn't talk necessarily about minimum wage, about overtime, about what's the language you need when you look at your paycheck and they didn't count the number of hours correctly and you've been swindled out of a bunch of your hours. Anyway, so I then did some experiments in my own class. Pablo Freire has a system of teaching called problem posing, and Elsa Orabach wrote a book about problem posing within the classroom. So I read her book and I tried applying kind of my own style to it, which was I found current events that I could use as case studies in the classroom, and we could try it out. So here are some examples of what I got. There's a Korean manicurist. She was working really long hours. And she said to her employer, you know what, why don't you just hire some more people? And then we wouldn't have to work so much. And the next day, she was fired. So an Asian advocacy group, legal aid group, took up her case, sued the employer, and lo and behold, she won. Not only did she win what she was suing for, but the jury was so moved that they gave her even more money. Okay, that's a great story, but at the end of the day, she was still unemployed. And today, she is still unemployed. So it was an opportunity to talk about the risk, the benefit, the risk of being a whistleblower and what that is. All right, we had in the spring the 100th anniversary of the Triangle Shirt Factory fire, and it gave a tremendous opportunity to talk about the garment industry in New York and what being being in a union is all about, and how that can benefit you versus being a day laborer. We talked a lot about tenants' rights and landlords' obligations, and we even spent a day writing letters to the landlord using real problems that people in my class had with their landlords. Of course, the hotel maid, who is from Guinea, which is one of the countries in my class, and Dominique Strauss-Kahn, this provided a tremendous opportunity to talk about sexual harassment on the job, particularly at a time when the majority of the women in my class were being hired as maids. And then there was one day when there was a neighbor dispute. It had been going on for years, and finally the guy just had enough, and the one neighbor was getting a haircut in the barber shop, and the other neighbor came in and shot him. And this provided a great opportunity to talk about what happens when you have a problem with your neighbor and you live in New York City. How far do you go? All right. Now, I learned a lot out of doing those lessons, and I don't know if they were successful or not. They were provocative, certainly. But one thing I learned about critical pedagogy is that it is innately negative. And so my class, which at times I hope is fun and a place that people want to come to, and they want to, it's kind of a nurturing place or a place to meet friends and have fun and learn English at the same time. Under these lesson plans, it was a scary place. It was a place where they're learning real things, but maybe I wasn't sure how I felt about it at the end of it. One thing I did take away, though, is the idea of having critical thinking in your English class. So I do think that we can all learn to examine materials and look at how reality and social roles are being portrayed. I think it's good to help students identify problems and options for solving them. I think it's good for these students to consider a variety of possible viewpoints or perspectives. They are amazingly worldly, but at the same time, they're coming from their own culture. They're living in New York City, where it's many cultures, and it's good to learn this kind of critical thinking. I think it's incredibly important to recognize each learner's own history of experience and allow them to bring that into the classroom. And finally, I think the most important thing that I learned out of this is it's incredibly important to use real language about content that is truly useful to the class. So finally, there are 4 challenges that we talked about. 1, extreme diversity. 2, managing an open classroom. 3, mixed levels and how to deal with that. And finally, 4, what do you teach? But at the end of the day, I really would encourage all of you to get involved with an experience like this, because you will meet the most incredible, fascinating people, the most courageous people, flexible, resilient people. And when you leave the classroom, even though you haven't been paid money, you will reap incredible rewards from it. Are there any questions? Yeah, okay. Emily? Emily, go ahead.
Yeah, you were talking about using all the authentic materials. I thought maybe you could comment on some of the trips that you've taken people on and the places in New York they've gone.
Okay, well, we went to the American Indian Museum, which was pretty interesting, and took them on the Staten Island Ferry. I have done food units where we actually go to the grocery store and stand in the grocery store and look at the different food aisles and look at different packaging and stuff like that. One day, we went across the street to Grand Central Station, which has a nice market in it, and I handed them my wallet, and I had made up a grocery list the night before, and I said, okay, guys, go buy me my groceries. And they had to, you know, navigate the market and find the food and buy the food and interact with the vendor, and that was kind of interesting. When we did the health unit, we went to the drugstore and looked at all the different stuff, so things like that. Oh, the other thing is the garden.
Were you there for the crock pot? You could tell me.
The crack pot?
The crock pots?
No.
Oh, you were not there.
No.
If I
Yes, go ahead.
One of our other teachers, now I can't remember who it was, built her lesson around, we had gotten the money to order crock pots for each of the students, and as Connie said, a lot of them had been cooking over fires and are really used to the American modern kitchen. So she did a hands-on lesson with everybody in their crock pots, cutting up vegetables.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, sorry you missed that.
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed that too.
But yeah, all the hands-on things and the authentic.
Yeah. One thing I want to say, you know, when you hear, oh, people cooking over their fires, you think, oh my God, savages or something. But actually, these people are amazingly worldly. In particular, the people from refugee camps. I think NGOs come in and educate, provide the education. They're extremely well educated, many of them, and extremely have a big world view. And you look at them and it's inconceivable that they were cooking over a fire when they're actually amazingly sophisticated people. Yeah, Scott?
Connie, can I, just one question that intrigues me is that when you, that's okay. When you go over when you raise the bar in terms of materials, your revised curriculum, I mean, it is raising the bar in the sense that how does it accommodate the mixed levels in the classroom? Because it strikes me that when you start talking about these issues, you're moving into a kind of linguistically much more complex language.
Yeah.
How did you manage that?
Luckily, it was an intermediate level class, and so it allowed me to do something a little bit more sophisticated. This is one of the things that Elsa Auerbach talks about, is that she believes quite strongly that yes, survival texts are sort of way down at the beginner level, but they don't necessarily have to be so prescriptive all the time. And they don't necessarily have to teach language of acquiescence or, you know, you can have language that complains, or, you know, teach language that is challenging. Or, yeah, that's still at a very beginner level. I think it's hard. I do.
Related to that, do you have any suggestions on, I mean, when you said critical pedagogy is innately negative, and that does seem to be one of the downsides of addressing these issues, that it's not very feel good.
Yeah.
How do you get around that? You just take it for trips.
I used it sparingly. You know, it wasn't a daily diet of, you know, now you're in America and it's really evil here, you know. It's cautionary, but I didn't really want it to dominate. But it is true that I felt ambivalent at the end of those lessons. Yeah.
Two questions. One, what are the conditions under which your students are currently living? They have been resettled here in the U.S., right? There are no refugee camps locally, are there?
Oh, no. They're living in all 5 boroughs, and they're living in apartments in all 5 boroughs. I think some of the Iraqis they come with money, and some of them are living in houses. But the IRC actually finds the housing and resettles them. I know the IRC has a building that they found in the Bronx, and they try to put a lot of the Bhutanese people within the same building so that they have a community of people around them. But they are you know, all over the map.
Thank you. And can you talk more about some of the volunteer opportunities and whether they would extend to teenagers?
Do they use teenagers in the camp in the summer?
Oh, I'm not sure. That's the youth program.
Yeah.
I can give you contact information about that.
Yeah.
But as far as I'm aware of, that everyone is 18.
Yeah.
Comes with volunteers.
But it might be
We
worth.
have a lot of volunteer opportunities.
Yeah, there are a lot of volunteer opportunities, but that's not a bad idea. You might contact the IRC, right, sitting beside you, about, they run a summer youth camp, which is an amazing, amazing thing, and getting some American kids involved in that might be a really cool thing. Yeah, good idea.
I was going to ask the same question, but in terms of a college student. I have a fourth-year electrical engineering student, and I was wondering about opportunities for her.
As far as I know, the opportunities have been for English teaching, right? That's where the volunteers are being used. And, you know, if she's interested in teaching English, often, actually, they could use assistant teachers, which I've had occasionally and way too rarely, because when you have these big classes with mixed levels in them, to have a college student there who could sit with somebody and help them read would be amazing. It would be fantastic. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.